Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Hill, Texas history teacher for Team Michigan State here at Owsley Junior High School. And today we are going to be learning about World War II. Now, as you remember, we've talked about World War I. We called it the Great War, and it really wasn't until World War II that they decided that they needed to change the name of the Great War and begin referring to it as World War I, because another war began that completely eclipsed the First World War in its size and its sheer number of combatants and casualties. So our essential question, as is usually the question with a lot of the stuff that we do, we all often talk about world events or events that happen in the United States, but more than anything, we're concerned about how it impacted Texas. So the essential question today is, how did World War II impact the political, economic, and social development of Texas? Key terms that we have today. Our first key term is the word propaganda. Propaganda is information, ideas, or rumors that are deliberately spread widely to help or harm a person, group, movement, or nation. Oftentimes, propaganda really exaggerates the situation, and they either try to vilify something or someone, or they try to promote them as being extra heroic. And you can see that in some of the samples that we've provided here. Down on the lower left here, you have a propaganda poster. It says, "Warning, our homes are in danger now." And you see these extremely exaggerated caricatures of a Japanese soldier and of a German, looks like Adolf Hitler. You can tell by the little tiny mustache he has there. So the purpose of this was to terrify people and make them realize that, we need to come together as a nation to fight against this threat that could eventually be dangerous to us here in the United States. In the middle, you see one that was used to recruit soldiers for the German army. Looks like specifically the SS, or the secret police sort of thing, that the special forces type soldiers that Germany had. It makes this German soldier look heroic. Notice his face is kind of covered so you can't see all of his features, so that he could be any German. And they're really promoting their military might here, and how they plan to take over the world. And then, of course, the famous Rosie the Riveter poster from the 1940s during the war, when women were encouraged to take the place of the men in factories, the men who had gone off to fight in the war. Our next key term is the term bias. A bias sort of goes along with propaganda. It means to show favoritism to a person, an idea, or group, usually seen in propaganda or news articles. So there you see. Obviously, these two posters would have been for the Americans, the Britons. They show Hitler, and they say, "The only way to end it is to end him. Are you doing all you can? Strong men and women like you, enlist now." So it's encouraging people to join the military. And then you see these cannons firing, and you can tell that both of these they're not from the German side of view. They're not from the German point of view. They're from the Allied point of view. Dictator, a person exercising absolute power, especially a ruler who has complete unrestricted control of a government. We have Hitler here, Benito Mussolini, who was the premier or the leader of Italy, and he was a dictator. And then we have Joseph Stalin, who was the leader of the Soviet Union. Internment. The term internment is a name given to the confinement camps for people of Japanese heritage in the U.S. These people were seen as threats during World War II because they were Japanese or of Japanese heritage. It didn't matter that they were American citizens, people who had been born in the United States. They were forced to go and live in these camps during World War II. So, if you remember, we talked in World War I, we had the Allied powers and the Central powers in World War I. Well, in World War II, we had a similar type of thing where we had a group of allies on one side and a group of allies on the other side. And a lot of the same ideas and concepts that caused that World War I sort of fed into this Second World War. The fact that there were so many groups that were allied together. When one went to war, then the others went to war as well. So the Allied powers were the United States, England, or the United Kingdom, France, the Soviet Union, which was now Russia, and China. Fighting against the Allied powers were the Axis powers, which were made up of Germany, Japan, and Italy. You can see here by this map, the green were the Allies before the attack on Pearl Harbor. The United States did not initially get involved in the war. The United States stayed neutral again, and it wasn't until the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor that the United States joined the fighting. The black countries are the ones who are the Axis powers. And you can see Germany, the countries that supported Germany, Italy, and then Japan over here. So, background information on World War II. The war lasted from 1939 to 1945. Prior to the war starting, Adolf Hitler, the leader of Germany, and Joseph Stalin, the leader of Russia, signed a pact known as the Hitler-Stalin Pact. Both countries agreed not to attack each other or to support a third power which attacked either of them. So even though they weren't quote-unquote allies, they had signed an agreement saying that they would not attack one another. So the Hitler-Stalin Pact. Poor economic conditions in Germany after World War I and the need for a leader helped pave the way for Adolf Hitler to rise to power in Germany. After World War I, the German people were completely deflated. They had this. Their world had just been turned upside down by the loss in World War I. They were forced to sign a treaty. They were forced to dismantle their military. They lost a sense of national pride because they were just so thoroughly destroyed. German money became worthless. Here you see a picture of some children playing with stacks of German Deutschmarks, the German money that was completely worthless after World War I. And Adolf Hitler came along. He was a leader who was getting the people fired up about the idea of a great and strong and powerful Germany, and he was able to consolidate power and lead them down a road that would eventually lead them to war again, and after that, sort of into ruin. So the start of the war was September 1st, 1939, when Germany attacked Poland and began their campaign to establish a large empire in Europe. After World War I, Germany was forced to give up land, and part of the land that they were forced to give up was given to Poland, which was an Eastern European nation. And because of that, when the war started, Germany invaded Poland, and the sole purpose was to get their land back. So some more background information. The U.S. wanted to remain neutral, but was forced to enter the war on December 7th, 1949, when Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. and nearly destroyed the United States Army's Pacific Fleet. Now, the political impact in Texas during World War II. Texans served in important leadership positions during the war. For instance, Dwight D. Eisenhower was the supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe, and he was born right here in Texas and went on to command not only the American forces in Europe, but also he was in control of the complete Allied forces in Europe. Admiral Chester Nimitz was commander of the United States Pacific Fleet. Oveta Culp Hobby was the first commander of the Women's Army Corps. Now, the Women's Army Corps did not fight at the time. All they did was provide support for the Army. Audie Murphy was a Texan who was a winner of the Congressional Medal of Honor and the most highly decorated soldier of World War II. There were military bases in Texas. Texas was a major training location for military personnel. It became the military aviation center for the United States military because of its good weather. Fort Worth was the headquarters of the Army Air Corps Training Command. We have an Air Force now, but during World War II, we did not have an Air Force. The Navy had its aviation wing. That there were naval aviators, fighter planes, and the Army Air Corps was the flying part of the U.S. military. It was part of the Army instead of its own branch. Texans in the war, over 750,000 Texans served. That's up quite a bit from in World War I, when only 200,000 Texans served in World War I. Many Texans were decorated with medals for their service. Now, the economic impact in Texas, it created a boom cycle in Texas and in the U.S. Economically. The United States had been mired in the Great Depression, and when we went to war, suddenly the factories roared back to life, and instead of making cars and refrigerators and the things that they did, they turned and they began making weapons of war. And by putting so many people back to work, it just infused the economy with all this new money, and it really helped pull the U.S. out of that depression. Military needs, as I said, boosted the U.S. and Texas economies, lifting the nation out of the Great Depression. Texas supplied gasoline for war machinery, and at the time, oil replaced cattle and cotton as the state's most profitable industry. Further urbanization. Texas cities grew as people sought jobs in cities with growing military and industrial production. The factories that were being built, or the factories that were coming back to life, they brought in new workers, and it caused more and more people to move to cities. Now, unfortunately, one of the consequences of the growth of these Texas cities was increased racial tension and violence, which we'll talk more about when we get into the civil rights movement. Texans supported the war effort, the same as in World War I, by purchasing war bonds, and they collected scrap metal. Scrap metal would be collected, and it was then taken and it was melted down, and it was used for military purposes. My dad used to tell me stories about when he was a kid, how him and his buddies would go around with wagons during World War II, and they would pick up cans and pieces of metal that they found and take it down to the local scrap collection place so that it could be used in the war. Women joined the workforce or served in the military, over 12,000. Texas housed about 30 prisoners of war camps. About 80,000 captured troops were held in Texas, most from Germany. And more than 750,000 Texans served in the armed forces. Boy, my animation was way off there. I don't know how that happened. I'll have to fix that. Sorry, guys. Dory Miller was a hero at Pearl Harbor. He was from Waco, Texas. If you've ever seen the movie Pearl Harbor, You've seen that the story goes that during the Japanese attack, Dory Miller, who was a cook on a ship, jumped behind a machine gun and actually shot down a Japanese plane, despite the fact that he had never had training. Women that joined the Women's Army Corps served as test pilots for planes. And here we have a man named Claire Chennault, who was a fighter pilot who led a group of Americans in China called the Flying Tigers. Okay, we talked about the term internment, and we said that that was the name of the camps that the Japanese people were held in during World War II. And there were internment camps in Texas for thousands of American citizens of Japanese, German, and Italian descent who were forcibly relocated to the camps because they were considered potential threats. Understand, the Japanese people were the ones who were mistreated the most during World War II here in the United States and forced to live in these camps. If there were German and Italian people that were kept in those camps, it's because something in their background made it appear as though they needed to be separated from the rest of the population, even though that's patently unfair to do that. But there were camps here in Texas where these Japanese citizens, or I'm sorry, these American citizens were kept simply because of their heritage, which obviously we know is incredibly wrong. There was rationing implemented to support the war effort. That means that only a limited amount of product was being made available to people. Texans had to make do with less of most daily goods, including gasoline, sugar, shoes, coffee, and meat, mostly beef, here in Texas. Some important events of World War II. And these are ones that you will learn more about when you actually get into American history and they talk about, and you learn about the war. Hitler and the Final Solution. This was Hitler's method of eliminating the Jewish people by placing them in concentration camps, or as we call them here in the United States, internment camps. The difference is, in our internment camps here in the United States, we just forced the people to live there. Yes, they were treated very poorly, but in concentration camps, notably the concentration camps that the Jewish people were forced to live in during World War II, they were death camps, meaning they were taken there and they were either actually killed outright or they were starved to death. And two of the more famous camps that we hear about here in the United States, or here in the world that we hear about where Jewish people were kept, were Auschwitz and Birkenau. Another of the important events of World War II was something called the Manhattan Project. It was the name given to a team of scientists that constructed the first atomic bomb. D-Day, June 6, 1944, was the Allied invasion of Normandy, France, and the purpose of that was to take France out of German control. It was the largest amphibian assault the world had ever seen. D-Day by the numbers. On this one day, June 6, 1944, this invasion, there were over 11,000 aircraft involved. There were 14,674 sorties or missions flown. There were over 6,000 sea vessels that were used, many of those carrying troops that were unloaded onto the beach. There were 156,000 troops that were deployed on D-Day. That means 156,000 men either got off of boats onto the beaches of Normandy or they paratrooped in behind enemy lines. There were over 10,000 casualties, 6,603 American casualties, 2,700 from the UK, and nearly 1,000 from Canada. There were 4,000 to 9,000 German deaths on D-Day. So we said that the Manhattan Project was what created the atomic bomb. The U.S. dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and they did this to avoid a land invasion and to save countless American lives. Now, understand this. It sounds kind of ridiculous that you would say that they dropped a bomb that killed thousands and thousands of people in order to save lives. But the idea was that had the Allies invaded the Japanese mainland, the number of casualties in American lives and of Japanese lives would have been far greater than the number of people who were killed at Hiroshima. And it would have taken longer. It would have been very long and drawn out and bloody if we would have invaded Japan. The U.S. was forced to drop a second bomb on the city of Nagasaki because Japan would not agree to an unconditional surrender. And then after the second bomb, Japan realized that they did not have the firepower to take what the United States had to offer, so they surrendered. After the war, the United Nations were formed to allow a neutral location for countries to discuss disagreements and hopefully avoid war in the future. Now, it has not ended war, but it has kept us from having a third world war. Our summary: World War II impacted Texas politically by producing many leaders, economically by providing fuel and food, and socially by supplying over 750,000 troops. So I hope you've learned something today from this. We will be testing over the last few topics that we've discussed in class this week. So be prepared for that. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.